Everywhere has some place where people aware of it tell you not to go. The bad part of town. The bad town. Hell, you ask people in America which state they think is awful to go to and you'll get a different answer based on each state. My answer is Wisconsin. I see a cheesehead and I'm filled with rage. Packers fans need to explode and Milwaukee needs to burn. This holds true in fictional settings as well. In Star Wars, you go to Nar Shaddaa to do anything illegal you can think of, and then get mugged. Tatooine too, but that's supposed to be a backwater nowhere even if Star Wars writers keep putting important things on it. In Warhammer, meanwhile, there's a whole lot of contenders for that title. Literally any Underhive for starters, and of course Kamra's a big one. God can't even help you if you end up there. If you expanded the other settings, there's even more bad parts of town, such as literally any Skaven-controlled area. Can't get much worse than that. But the constant across the settings stands out as what's probably the worst place to end up, even if the Skaven and Dark Eldar are always trying to outdo it in the field of being awful. The Warp, the realm of chaos. There's a lot of names for this place, and many of them are all about informing you of what it truly is. Hell. Eternal torment and suffering at the hands of demons await most of who end up here, even if in 40k they've got some standardized methods of holding that off. So let's do what qualifies you for insanity, and try to understand the hellscape that is the realm of chaos. It sucks so bad, but without it, Warhammer just wouldn't be the same. But before I begin, would you like a new way to play in the world of Warhammer 40,000? Well, let me introduce you to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, this video's sponsor. Tacticus is a turn-based tactical strategy game set, of course, in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Bring some of the most powerful warriors in the setting to bear as you expand your collection of them to wipe out all who would oppose you in everything from PvE campaigns, PvP, guild raids, and more. I like playing the Eldari because they are the coolest and the best, and any chance I get to throw an autark at someone, I will grab with both hands, and Tacticus lets me do just that. In celebration of the Warhammer Skulls event, Tacticus has partnered with Dawn of War 4 and have a whole bevy of events coming up. You can enjoy Tacticus' own recreation of Last Stand, even featuring Cyrus as a playable character you'll be able to unlock starting on May 24th as a 7-day event. Starting on May 28th, you can take command of the Necrons against the Dark Angels in a 2-week event to see if you can defeat not only one of the greatest of Space Marine chapters, but take down none other than Lionel Johnson himself as the final boss. He'll be coming as a raid boss for your guild to take on June 17th, in case you want to cut right to the head honcho himself. And with the Chronomancer Thothmech coming on May 31st to unlock, your Necrons will get just the techno magic they need to take on the Imperium's finest. To enjoy a fun, fast-paced strategy game set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe that you can play on your phone, look no further. Scan the QR code or use the link in the description, download Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, and get to work claiming the galaxy in your faction's name. Now then, let's see what it's like to live in the place beneath the bottom of the barrel. Just kidding, of course. You can't live here. Not as we'd know living at any rate. Funny thing about the warp before we start. The specifics are actually pretty similar between the Warhammer settings, at least in terms of the gods and what happens to who ends up here. It's the generalities that are different. How something like that is achieved is kinda mind-blowing to me, that the broad strokes vary wildly but the specifics are near identical. But that's the wonderful worlds of Warhammer for you, I guess. So let's start with 40k, since for once at least, I would say there's more to talk about than with fantasy. Every setting in space needs FTL. Alright, I guess not every setting, technically, but it usually helps. Imagine if Mass Effect didn't have relays. That'd make the setting impossible for quite a few reasons, but chief among them being, how's Commander Shepard supposed to bang his way across the galaxy while he defeats the Reapers without the relays? Unfortunately for the fine folks of Warhammer 40,000, FTL here involves going through hell, so it's a bit of a rough start. The warp in 40k was once the Sea of Souls, doubling as an afterlife and bachelor pad of the old ones and whatever gods were around in the earliest days of 40k's timeline. Chiefly the Eldar ones, but I have to imagine there were others there as well. I'm not gonna say it was perfectly calm back then, because surely even before the Necrons showed up, there must have been some conflict and asshole deities, but it was a damn sight better than what it would become. All things considered, it was a fairly chill and relaxed place that also let you draw on it to do magic with. Were it to remain like this, 40k probably would have had one of the safest and most efficient FTL systems imaginable, and likely would look a lot more like a science fantasy D&D game than anything else. Spelljammer 40,000 was not to be, however, as the Necrons did show up and started slaughtering any old one or servant of the old ones in their path. The massive amounts of warfare and all the negative emotions that come with a galaxy-wide war corrupted the warp, perhaps irrevocably, turning it from the Sea of Souls into the hellscape it is nowadays. Not immediately, though. While we had 3 Chaos gods arise over the years, Chaos was typically not mentioned as being too active before the fall of the Eldar. I have to imagine this isn't for a lack of trying on their part, but rather because the situation was stable enough still that they could be held at bay easily enough. Presumably because of pantheons like the Eldar gods reigning supreme, the warp still had enough Sea of Souls positive vibes in it to not be inherently awful. FTL travel was still safe enough that non-Eldar species without total mastery over magic could use it, and while I am making some assumption here, I'd say that the situation sort of resembled a smaller version of what I said in the intro to this video. The warp likely itself had bad neighborhoods in a sense. If you take a left in warp space relative to this planet over here, you end up in Khorne's domain. Best to take the long route to that planet instead. But as Slaanesh formed, it only grew worse and worse. What was once still at least a bit calm quickly became a nightmarish realm of, well, literal nightmares actually, now that I think about it. Warp storms cut off the galaxy as planet after planet was now left to their own devices. As the majority of the Eldar's hedonism reached its peak, Slaanesh was born and the warp was officially borked. True, her birth did blow away the warp storms plaguing the galaxy, but it also perhaps permanently ruined any chance of things being nice again. No more united pantheon of gods to stand against them, just the Emperor, and well, you saw how well that turned out. The warp is still the way the majority of people travel across the galaxy. Yes, most factions actually use different FTL methods, but the average being is using the warp. Humanity and the other factions that travel with the warp outnumber everyone else, at least combined, so that's still how most folk get around. Even if some of those people are the orcs and their health and safety regulations are admittedly somewhat intentionally almost non-existent. But the state it's in means that protections are in order for most everyone. Geller fields or only diving slightly into it in exchange for a slower pace are necessary to survive the journey. It will result in your eternal torment otherwise. The warp is also still the afterlife, even though calling it the Sea of Souls doesn't do it justice any longer, which really sucks for everyone. The Emperor's probably got some kind of afterlife for humans going on, but A, not everyone gets the chance to join it, and B, that afterlife involves fighting demons for him some more, now you're just a ghost doing it. So one way or another, the average person will find themselves stuck dealing with the warp eventually. Not a good feeling by any means. As for how it works though, the key is emotions. Most people are aware the warp interacts with emotions, but this does result in more than just a chaos god gaining power. For example, while the bloodshed and violence of warfare empowers Khorne, all those emotions of rage and everything else still interact with the general warp as well. Even you yourself simply thinking and feeling whatever you might be feeling in your corner of 40k affects the warp. Every living being with a soul, including the Tau and their dimmed ones, has these emotions and thoughts echo back into the warp. Some of them feed one god or another in particular, but all of them translate into echoes across the immaterium. On the level of individuals, this does nothing. It's like adding a cup of water to the ocean. Yeah, something technically happened, you did add water, but the ocean is quite big, you haven't meaningfully done anything. Indeed, the warp also is quite big. One guy feeling hopeful or angry or sad or horny isn't going to cause any meaningful echoes beyond at the absolute most some empath or ship passing through the warp nearby suddenly getting a thought that isn't their own out of nowhere, which will quickly pass. Even something as small as that is likely stretching how much one person can have an effect on the warp. Psykers are more noticeable, and the most powerful of them, such as Eldrad or Magnus, can easily influence the warp, but your average Psyker likely isn't causing more than small waves, and even then, they're mostly just lighting a beacon in the warp for demons to find, not causing ocean currents and all the like. But you get 100 people together, or 1,000, or 1,000,000, or entire galactic civilizations, and those thoughts have power. They have real, tangible effects in the other world that gives rise to demons and more. And these effects are unpredictable, oftentimes nonsensical, and almost always violent and lethal. Because it isn't just emotions, but also thoughts and actions as well that affect the warp, there's no turning this off. In theory, you could unshitify the warp. All you would need to do is get everyone to get along, lay down their weapons, and come to terms with each other and start an era of peace and prosperity in Warhammer 40,000. And even if you did pull it off, there'd still be problems. Enough turbulence in the warp, oftentimes caused by sufficiently traumatic and brutal events in real space, and you get a warp storm. Problems don't just happen because an army attacked another one. A sufficiently large natural disaster could in theory also make a warp storm, especially if it's lethal enough that a lot of people die and a lot of souls enter the warp at once. Even ignoring that, how often are you having a bad day or bad thoughts? I'm not here to psychoanalyze you, but genuinely, for the sake of the exercise, how often do you have a negative thought or emotion? Not even when you act on, you just have it. We don't live in 40k and plenty of people have negative thoughts. The happiest person you know probably has at least a few negative thoughts daily, it's just life. Like, man, that asshole cut me off in traffic, I'm gonna be pissed for the next few minutes and get over it then. Well, multiply that by an entire society and suddenly 40k sucking as hard as it does makes a lot more sense. And since the evil deities are currently supreme in the warp, any massive motions to make the warp revert back to the calmer sea of souls would likely get stomped down, causing the issue to just keep compiling. The Chaos Gods do evil things, which makes people sad or mad, which makes the warp worse and empowers chaos. Rinse and repeat forever. On that note though, to what extent the warp affects real space and vice versa is hard to pin down, because cause and effect are funny things with this subject. For example, let's say Khorne is briefly the dominant Chaos God. There will undoubtedly be more wars, but are there more wars because Khorne is dominant, or is Khorne dominant because there's more wars? Did he cause those wars in order to become dominant, or did those wars happen regardless of him? He rode the wave to the top and now is causing more wars. How influential the Chaos Gods are and how much the material world determines who's dominant is a messy affair. There's correlation and causation here, but to what extent either of them go is up in the air. Warp storms should bear special mention really quickly again, because they don't actually affect real space. A warp rift is a tear in the fabric of reality, but warp storms are purely warp phenomena. We in the real world could be in the middle of a warp storm for all we know if we rolled a natural 1 and 40k is the science fiction future we're getting, and we'd never know. As much as they are problematic, they aren't for random schmucks by and large. Probably makes hell on psychers in the relative area in real space, though. Areas in real space do incidentally correspond to an area in the warp, for all that they likely don't look anywhere near similar. Now, the thing about understanding the warp is that it's both impossible and incredibly easy. Everything preceding this bit, to the best of this idiot's knowledge, is true and factual. The nature of the warp is fairly easy to pin down, as I've done. The moment you try and accurately describe its behavior, however, at least at any level beyond saying broadly malicious, you simply can't. Let's say you're John Imperialman. You've had your life of whatever quality, because it doesn't really matter from this point going forward. You somehow get sucked into a warp rift that opened next to you, probably because Tzeentch was bored and thought it'd be funny. Upon entering, what happens to you? Literally anything. The warp is dreams and the subconscious made manifest into their own reality. How many times have you had a dream that when you woke up made you just sit there for a second and go, what the fuck was that about? Because I've had a lot of those dreams. I know I'm weird, but they happen. You may enter the warp and for a bit be perfectly fine. You may also immediately turn inside out eyeballs first, or explode, or be perfectly fine from your perspective, but anyone who's watching you sees you slowly turning into a living apple pie. It's nonsense landed there. There is no predicting what exactly will happen. Nothing might happen. It's not likely, but the warp does have calm areas even still. You may go into the warp and absolutely nothing happens, and then a bit later you plop back out. Time does run strangely in there though, so you might plop back out 5 minutes after you entered, 5 years, or 5 decades before you entered. But you might still be fine. Time running weirdly also means that since Khorne exists, he's always existed, even while simultaneously there's been times where he didn't. But for you, Mr. John Imperialman, nothing had happened aside from coming out a bit later than you experienced. Or you get jumped by Chaos Undivided demons, or demons of a certain god. About the only thing I tentatively want to say is that you can breathe. Enough people get lost in there without the lore ending with suffocation that I'm willing to say the warp either somehow has consistent oxygen, or it's just not necessary to breathe there. But it might also be an issue sometimes. There is no certainty except for when there is, and in those areas of certainty, everything makes sense until it doesn't. Welcome to Wacky Nonsense Land. Population you, absolutely no one, including you, and you and several infinities worth of demons. Your willpower can shape the warp once you enter, since as a realm of thought, someone sufficiently strong-willed can influence it. But before you go thinking, oh well, I'd simply handle it, no you wouldn't. Warp space tends to drive people to insanity and or chaos corruption. Chances are you are not that guy. You would not simply think away all your problems, and you drown in a sea of madness. Every bit of lore where someone is so strong-willed they handle the warp is accompanied by a trillion unsaid instances of people dying horribly in it. For some slightly lighter stuff, there are sub-realms of the warp and border regions. The webway is the most prominent, being not quite warp, not quite material, and in between both. It lets you go anywhere, it's mostly safe to be in, aside from potentially getting jumped by one of the types of Eldar and the Guardians it has, and it has inherent safeguards from chaos. It is, however, breaking down and being flooded by the warp on occasion, so unless someone gets Bob the Builder to patch it up, it's likely going to be totally subsumed into the Immaterium sooner or later. There's also the Lion's weird sub-realm he dreamed up after 10,000 years of napping, which I believe is called Mirror Caliban. It resembles, of course, his homeworld of Caliban, pre-explosion at any rate. He can use it like a personal webway. It had the Emperor's shield in it, and the Emperor himself is in it, as are the Chaos Gods, in a metaphorical sense at any rate. Other people can go in with him, and since they don't go insane or mutate, I have to assume the place is safe-ish, but if it truly is a mirror of old Caliban, I'm sure there's something horrible in there somewhere if you look hard enough. If you're a psyker, the warp is also the source of your powers, which is as awful as it sounds. You tap into hell every time you cast a spell, and for most people, sooner or later, this backfires spectacularly. Demons, explosions that weren't intentional, insanity, all this and more awaits you as a wizard in 40k. The warp warp in 40k is awful, but it's an awful thing that people have to interact with. It ain't going anywhere, but inflicts its presence on reality plenty often, and since it's fed by every negative thought you've ever had, it's only going to keep being awful. Sucks to suck, Milky Way galaxy. There is the potential that other galaxies have nicer warps, however. Calmer areas of the warp are oftentimes corresponding to areas in real space without much life, since there's no emotions or thought to churn it up. In the space between galaxies, it's likely still, and in nicer galaxies, there's probably happier gods and everything is lovely, at least until the Tyranids eat everyone in them. Let's move on over to Fantasyland now. I'll throw Age of Sigmar into the pile for this segment, since while there are a few small differences between Fantasy and AOS's Chaos, I don't find them significant enough to worry about much, aside from a few key points I'll bring up. In Warhammer Fantasy, the Realm of Chaos is a slightly more generic evil hell dimension. It's where the 4 Chaos gods reign supreme, where dark powers dictate both their own realms, Chaos as a whole, and how they'll bring next their wrath to the world of mortals. They do that in 40k too, but here it's a lot more fantastical, because there's no spaceships flying around. The Realm of Chaos doesn't double as the FTL dimension, because a fantasy setting doesn't need FTL. Don't feel bad though, because much like the Warp is the source of Psyker powers, the Realm of Chaos is the source of magic. And since fantasy is an outright fantasy setting, we get a whole lot more information on what that looks like. The Realm of Chaos is still a realm of pure magical energy. The relationship of thoughts forming in the Warp is much less prominent, even if some lines such as those by Cathayan Dragon Children in recent times do hint that it's similar, but by and large that's less prominent. It does much more easily leak into the Warhammer world, however, mostly because at the North and South Poles there's 2 massive former Old One transport gates that were corrupted and exploded into chaos rifts. From here, the chaotic magic filters into reality as dark magic. It's a bit less evil than pure chaos energy, but chances are if you use it and are untrained in using it, you're still gonna explode into a chaos spawn. It'll also still almost certainly corrupt you into being an evil person, even if you don't become mutated or an outright follower of chaos by using it. From there, the magic splits into the 8 winds of magic. There's still some chaos in this magic, but less, and depending on which kind of magic, the exact amount does vary. From there, ambient magic can settle in certain areas, it can be knitted back into high magic to be free of chaos taint, or to just be drained out of the world by the vortex in Ulthuan. The Realm of Chaos also has far more gray area in where it actually exists than in 40k, which tends to either be you are in the warp, or you are not. Because those polar gates have been spewing warp magic into reality for a good 10,000 years or so, much of the northern and southern areas of the planet are corrupted hellscapes. But it's a gradual thing, like how you don't just walk 10 feet to the left in a forest in real life and suddenly you're in a desert like a Minecraft biome. Far enough away and there's no influence for it in fantasy. It isn't like 40k where a rift the size of a person opens up and the entire planet is now in danger. As you start approaching the northern bits where chaos can first be felt consistently, it still won't be too noticeable. The animals might be a bit angrier, a few more monsters than average lurking about. These are still things that can be found in other areas of the Warhammer world unrelated to chaos, so the problems aren't too chaotic yet. People can still live in these areas, the most prominent being certain Kislevites and the southern Norscan tribes, of whom many members actually trade with non-Norskins peacefully. Aside from Johan the Not Viking being biologically and spiritually predisposed towards being built like a shit brick house, not too much is immediately noticeable. Go farther north, however, and it becomes more obvious as you travel. The ground becomes an icy wasteland, admittedly true in real life too, but now there's properly mutated monsters running about. Proper Chaos Warriors are most of whom you'll find up here, as anyone weaker is either dead or soon to be dead. Not that will necessarily grant them peace. As you keep going north, things keep getting more messed up. I believe that Aurora Borealis in Warhammer Fantasy is not localized entirely in your kitchen, but rather magic flowing into the world. When you get as close to the source as this, the ground can become blackened with iron, the sky an endless array of colors both normal and impossible, and the monsters by this point have stopped making any sort of sense. Keep going onward and you can enter the portal to the Realm of Chaos, which if you somehow survive that, you immediately become at least a Chaos Lord and probably a Demon Prince as well, since you've entered Hell and lived. From here it becomes roughly the same goofy nonsense world of 40k's Warp, with mostly the same gods, if a few more unique ones like a shoot running around as well. The Chaos Wastes, where it's most like the Realm of Chaos without being it proper, have some of these properties as well. The land is inhospitable, except for when you stumble across a random field somehow both pristine and untouched by chaos. There's no civilizations here, only ruins at most, until you find an intact city used as a hub by all the Chaos Gods for, by their standards, peaceful interactions. There's no rules except for when there are, except for when there aren't. Welcome to Hell. It is more regularly traversed to as a result of the entry entrance being a permanent fixed location, however. Someone vying for Chaos's favor in 40k has to consult tomes or existing cultists for rituals, figure out how to prepare them, work out all sorts of glyphs and pictograms and whatnot. You know what you need to do to find Chaos in fantasy? Walk north. Yeah, it's gonna be brutal, but ironically enough, that might help you out. You get devoured by soup wolves on the way to the Chaos Wastes, you might end up in Moore's Garden. The guy who failed at casting a ritual to grab Tzeentch's attention is almost certainly getting devoured by demons. The journey will toughen you up too if you survive it, something highly needed to survive what comes at the end of it. In theory, the above also applies to the southern Chaos Portal as well, but that's in Warhammer Antarctica, which is also an unconnected landmass as it is in real life. I guess the seas probably get choppier and the sea monsters nastier, but that's a lot less noteworthy than watching the gradual transition from the tundra to the realm of the Dark Gods. In Age of Sigmar, Chaos is even more simple, at least to me it reads as such. The winds of magic coalesced into the mortal realms, which themselves are the source of all magic. As a consequence, magic doesn't flow from chaos anymore. It instead comes from the mortal realms, still blowing throughout all reality, but now fire magic comes from the realm of fire. It's still dangerous, but less inherently evil. Chaos does, however, still have unique magics to itself and has no problem corrupting landscapes, and it certainly isn't less chaotic even if magic is less tied to it now. Parts of the mortal realms are so corrupted as to be indistinguishable from the realm of chaos proper, be it chaos in general or the home turf of a particular god. Nowhere is truly safe, as chaos nearly overran all of the realms before, and they seem eager to get that going again. And in every setting across the warp or realm of chaos, or whatever you want to call it, also rages the Great Game. At any moment, a sizable chunk of Chaos's forces aren't actually doing anything related to mortals. Instead, they're locked in perpetual combat with one another at all times. Each Chaos God, you see, wants to be the top and only dog, with the potential exception of Tzeentch, of course, but even if he doesn't want to completely win, he certainly still wants to be more powerful than his brethren. A mortal who could safely spy into the realm of chaos would find that for all the preachers of the world may claim that demons exist to corrupt mortals and punish you for your sins, that isn't necessarily true. This person would see battlefields infinitely large and infinitely small, endlessly bloody and yet with not a single sword being swung all at the same time as the legions of chaos fight, debate, delay, and slaughter one another endlessly. These are battlefields where power is spent and yet nothing is lost, as demons cannot permanently die except for the rarest of circumstances. The warp isn't just a danger to mortals, it's a danger to the demons who inhabit it by virtue of the fact that at any moment these demons have at least 3 opposing kinds of demons who would gladly see them sent back to their master. There's, as always with these sorts of things, plenty more you could talk about, but for an overview of the warp/realm of chaos as a whole, I feel I've done the job well enough. So now then, how about we talk about some of the places within it? I wouldn't go so far as to claim that they're islands of stability, but more so areas where you can expect certain themes, aka the homes of the Chaos Gods. Starting with Big K, as talks about Chaos Gods tend to do, we have Khorne's realm of the Brass Citadel. I've also found the simple name of Khorne's domain, but not only is Khorne not exactly a creative god, but most of his realm is endless wastelands of blood, brass, and people murdering each other. The Brass Citadel is basically the only thing of note within this realm. Not quite the only thing, but close. As Khorne's realm, though, you're gonna find fights and angry people in it. You yourself will become angry in it, and I don't mean a little pissed. I mean that you will almost certainly lose all sense of yourself to anything but an endless stream of rage and hatred for everyone around you. Battle and blood are all that'll matter to you for the rest of your soon-to-end life, as you throw yourselves into one of the countless battles around the Blood God's realm. The ground is coated in blood, corpses litter the landscape, and of course the Skull God has plenty of skulls strewn about. You may think that they all go to the Skull Throne, but such is not the case. Only the very best skulls from the very best fights can be granted the honor of a place on that wondrous chair. For the rest of them, across the landscape do they lay. Towards the edges of the realm lay massive volcanoes vomiting smoke and sulfur into the sky, and near them are forges manned by countless lesser demons and the occasional mortal bound to them. For those unlucky enough to be used in these furnaces, because of course the souls of the damned are an important component, they're permanently fused into demonic weapons and armor, if not the anvils themselves, forever screaming in agony as the Blood God uses them for his conquests. Now's a good time to note that if the edginess of all this bothers you, I don't know why you're here. It's chaos, they're evil demons from hell. If all this sounds kinda childish to you, I advise you to find another hobby. This is Warhammer, we clown in this MF. Speaking of, there's rivers of blood everywhere, but I'm sure you could have guessed that already. Another thing to note on a slightly more serious note is that the borders of the Chaos God's domains are perpetually changing as they wax and wane in power. For those of you with a limited imagination, you may wonder how it's possible that Khorne's realm has defined edges with these volcanoes in such conditions. The answer is that it's chaos. The volcanoes move, or the landscape moves around them, or whatever other crap you might come up with. I heavily advise you not to think about it too hard, not even because GW got lazy with the lore, but because it's intentionally designed to not make any sense. It's chaos. Nonsense is its bread and butter. On the shore of a literal lake of blood lies the Brass Citadel itself. These towering walls are built on foundations of presumably brass, since Khorne loves brass, but there's so many skulls here that they form the ground, and no one can actually see whatever the foundations of the buildings are like. There's actually guard demons here that don't just fight all the time. I'm sure they fight plenty, but they're usually on watch for intruders into Khorne's domain, which does happen. Usually from other demons, since a mortal sneaking into Khorne's house is one of the least efficient ways to commit suicide that there is. There's drawbridges and all that fancy stuff, and if memory serves, demons of Khorne slain in combat have to swim through the boiling blood moat around it to redeem themselves and be reformed. I may be faintly misremembering the specifics on that topic, however. I'm positive slain Khornate demons have to crawl or swim through something hellish, and I think it's that, but do be aware I could be switching some things up. On top of all this, there's dueling grounds aplenty, barracks for some reason, anything you can think of being in a medieval citadel, honestly, you can find here, just with far more skulls and blood than is normal. With the specific structures of what's here, it's honestly nothing too crazy. Rather, the enormous scale and the realization that all of this is constructed with untold numbers of corpses and souls is what drives Khorne's particular flavor of chaos and sanity. They even have animal pens for Khorne's flesh hounds, which I have to assume working there is a punishment. The arenas even double as how you get promoted. If you're a bloodthirster and want a promotion, challenge a higher ranking one. If you die, you get turned into a weapon. If you win, the other guy gets turned into a weapon and you get his job. Khorne doesn't give a shit, his followers are killing each other, might makes right, and blood is flowing. Good times are had by him one way or another. And of course, the Skull Throne. A simple name for the seat of one of the most powerful deities in Warhammer, this is where Khorne himself resides. Impossible to measure how large it is, the entire thing is constructed out of the best skulls of the best champions Khorne's chosen have slain. He doesn't move from it much, but he always watches, rages, and waits for the next conflict to send his demons into. Beneath him, his endless armies fight each other non-stop. Given how the warp works, and with the knowledge that in the book Liber Chaotica, an Empire of Man scholar saw the traitor legions of 40k, I have to assume that bloodthirsters are fighting Khornate warriors from fantasy and world eaters at the same time. And of course, this is where Tuska Demonkiller and his boys are fighting. Khorne loves those guys. He wants front row ticket to the eternal showdown between his own forces and a Krork in the making, and his lesser Krork underlings in the making. Good times had by everyone involved, because everyone involved loves the fight. Alright, to tell you the truth, that's actually taking place outside the Brass Citadel, but come on, you can't tell me after an eternity of fighting in his realm, Khorne didn't bring them in front of the Skull Throne at least once. There are also halls where those who've earned Khorne's favor can fight forever after death. That, after all, is what Valkyria the Bloody's job is, as the totally not Valkyrie of Khorne. Find worthy fighters, bring them back, let them kill each other for all time, because that's what Big K likes. Khorne's realm is simple, like Khorne. There's only so much to say, but that's because there's only so much to say on Khorne. It's the closest to resembling the common idea of what hell is like, what with all the fire and blood, but aside from that, that's kinda it. Red demons, some orcs, and a few mortals who are in either their version of heaven or one of the worst hells. So now with that out of the way, let's get more confusing. Don't come here if you're tripping on acid. It'll either let you truly unlock the secrets of the universe or break your mind even harder than anything to do with Tzeentch already does. Probably both, to be frank. Tzeentch's realm is ironically for him even simpler to talk about, though not because of the lack of complexity. More so because there's only so many ways for both myself and the writers to say that it's a land of utter chicanery and nonsense that changes all the time, is wacko bananas, and hurts your brain to look at or think about. Tzeentch's realm is largely dominated by one major feature, the crystalline labyrinth. For the most part, there's no guardians of any kind. I've not a doubt in my mind there's plenty of Tzeentch demons in there for their own purposes that'll kill, mutate, or experiment on you, but there aren't any there for the purpose of guarding it. Tzeentch doesn't bother with that. He doesn't need to. For starters, you tend to need to be at least a little insane and into Tzeentch stuff to enter the maze to begin with. If you weren't already nuts, you swiftly will be, because its defenses are reflecting what's essentially warp stuff made manifest back at you. Thoughts, dreams, nightmares, hopes, ambitions, all of this is thrown in your face as you wander around. And chaos being what it is, these can easily become physical threats at a moment's notice. Honestly, I think that's even more effective than a bloodthirster for keeping your stuff safe. You ever have a dream where you find true love and then wake up? Imagine being physically assaulted by that. I'm blowing my shit smooth off without a moment's hesitation. There's a few different places of interest within the crystalline labyrinth that are sort of stable, although sort of is the operative phrase. One is a hidden path that leads to ultimate power and knowledge, no questions asked. The only catch is it's protected by the single guardian Tzeentch specifically employs, who asks you 9 riddles. If you answer them all right, you pass. If you don't, you wander the maze forever. Many have tried, but the only person to succeed was a girl with a small black dog. so Dorothy and Toto as I understand things, and she thought she was far from Kansas and Oz. For less goofy old lore supplements, we have the Library of Lies. Every lie ever said is recorded here in demonic speech. Whenever someone says a new lie, it magically shows up here, which I think is the second or third time we've had something in Warhammer that is a physical manifestation of lying to your spouse about how much you spend on Warhammer. Funny that. At the center of the maze lies the impossible fortress. You need to be insane just to find it, and even then, mortals can't handle it. Even more than the rest of the warp, there are no rules here. There's no gravity, and also low gravity, but normal gravity, and sometimes we have Vegeta training levels of gravity. Sometimes the major forces of the universe, like electromagnetism, turn off, which is the kind of thing that unmakes a human body, I have to assume. Even lesser demons or non-Tzeentchian ones can suffer here as the rules change on a dime once again and turn them inside out and outside in that order if they're lucky. Only Lords of Change can reliably navigate this mess and get the honor of being able to go see Tzeentch himself as he plots, schemes, and probably wanders around like the most overly ADHD-ridden being to ever exist. Some other beings like Magnus probably can enter as well, but the amount of non-greater demons of Tzeentch that can do that like him can almost certainly be counted on one hand. At the very center of the fortress, meanwhile, is the Hidden Library. It's like the Library of Knives, but this one has all knowledge ever in it. That, however, I'm willing to say is an exaggeration, since if it was true, Tzeentch wouldn't have had to toss Kairos Fateweaver into a magical black hole so he could learn the true secrets of everything ever. Still though, it's no doubt an immense reservoir of knowledge that could give you functionally unlimited power. Shame it's in the middle of the castle where the rules of physics are dictated by spinning a wheel every 5 seconds, and also immensely chaos corrupted. And also Tzeentch is literally right there and probably doesn't want intruders. Although on actually second thought, people might come here all the time. Tzeentch is absolutely the kind of god to occasionally give people exactly what they ask for and let them dig the hole themselves. There's probably thousands of people here wandering around immune to any negative effects. Other than the negative effects of reading what's in here, of course. Those Darkest Dungeon style mental breaks are Tzeentch's version of watching Tuska headbutt a bloodthirster. To sum up, a simple realm to explain, but only in broad strokes, because for specifics it gets impossible. There's almost no point in explaining any specifics of Tzeentch's realm because they change on a dime and are made of hopes and dreams even more so than the warp already is. There's a few more places within as well, but with very little lore I could find and in what is both a Tzeentchian plan of mine and me being a lazy bastard, I have full faith in you being able to figure out what they are. I have a few assumptions on what the frozen moon is and I assume at least half of them are right. Let's move on to greener pastures now. Greener and smellier. You ever walk in a room and are immediately hit with a wall of smell? I had that before. Side note, did you know that just because it's a church bathroom, it doesn't stop people from shitting on the floor? I know that. I had to clean that. I'm really hoping that scores me some brownie points with St. Peter, because it certainly wasn't worth the $10 an hour. Anyways, yes, the Garden of Nurgle. The smell is probably the first thing you'll notice. All rotten and sweet, but in that sickly sweet corpse kind of way. Or if you're unlucky, it just smells like a Yu-Gi-Oh tournament. Pestilence covers the air and landscape entirely, for Nurgle does so love his sickly life forms. Nurgle's garden is of course alive, and in fitting with his whole life shtick, it is especially prone to waxing and waning. When Nurgle is ascendant and plague spread across the land, it encroaches heavily into the territory of the other Chaos gods. When Nurgle's on the back foot, it recedes, his borders shrinking, but don't take that to mean the garden is outright weaker. It lies dormant, waiting to bloom again as the power it feasted on from the other realms helps the cycle of life and decay continue ever onward. It is in many aspects a cancer. Ironically for Nurgle, he tends to be the least stable of the Chaos Gods in this regard, with his power fluctuating wildly from the strongest Chaos God to the weakest, and his garden reflects this. The landscape of Nurgle's garden is as lush as you can imagine, as long as you imagine gross and sickly things, and is honestly my favorite out of all of them design-wise. As you can see in Total Warhammer, as long as you stick with the theme of it being gross and alive, you can find anything in here. I hate looking at it, don't get me wrong. I may be a messy person, but I'm not a dirty person, and the idea of spending even a nanosecond in somewhere that so much as resembles Nurgle's garden sends shivers down my spine. But as far as I'm concerned, that means the writers and designers have done a fantastic job setting the scene. Marshes of muck dot the landscape. Disgusting creatures such as his plague toads can be found bathing in waters filled with their own filth. And I think I need to go get my flu shot after this, but goddamn is it masterfully realized. There are trees of sickness in the shape of literal, actual trees, and Nurgle tends to them with such care that you'd think he's the god of botany. Nurgle's own seat of power is his mansion, where he spends his time jovially going about his day, creating plagues and having fun with Nurglings. At his cauldron, he creates new and exciting plagues every day, working on his attempts to create the ultimate sickness to sweep across the galaxy in a virulent tide. Sometimes there's Nurglings hanging around him, sometimes he's alone, but always he is slowly and steadily going about his work. At least when he isn't taking the time to appreciate and tend to his garden, of which includes such lovely sights as those living sickness trees that also eat people, the goddess either Isha or Shalia, depending on which setting you're reading, and a bunch of crystallized Eldar Farseers trapped in perpetual torment after a failed attempt to rescue Isha. Supposedly, there's also something interesting about Nurgle's mansion itself. It's totally locked and boarded up. No one aside from Nurgle, including his demons, is allowed inside, at least according to Godblight. While I could be misreading things, Nurgle's cauldron always struck me as something within the mansion itself, or at least on a back patio or something. But that being said, remember the warp waxes and wanes, and Nurgle is a god of despair as well. The dude could be terminally depressed to a level only a chaos god can be, and his mansion being boarded up could be akin to when you're having a bad week and can barely summon the energy to leave your house. Maybe it's open for visitors sometimes, but then the whims of the warp make it so that it has always been permanently closed to visitors. Or Nurgle can just remove the memory of anyone who's been in it. I imagine a chaos god is capable of that, inviting someone in to test some plagues and then removing their memory of where it happened in his realm. Or again, I could be wrong and misread or misremembering what I read. Cauldron's, in all honesty, probably somewhere else in his garden, and I'm just incorrect about most of this rant. I do think he's secretly depressed, though, god of despair and all that. Just because he's usually seen as jovial doesn't mean he isn't also depressed. Depressed people can feel happiness. It isn't just a never-ending stream of sad thoughts, believe it or not. There's a variety of other features in his garden, most of which don't bear too much time discussing because they're very obvious in what they are. Not even like Tzeentch, where an assumption is half right. Argus, the Plague Moon, is a moon in Nurgle's realm that's especially sickly, that sort of deal. There is something neat called the Deathbeds, though. It traps any invaders in Nurgle's garden for some future use or other by the Plague Father. You can escape by telling him a joke or a story he finds particularly amusing, though escape here means he plucks you out and rewards you by letting you become a vessel for one of his plagues. For a dedicated follower of him, this is great, but for anyone else, escaping the sea of diarrhea to become patient zero for super diarrhea is probably not the freedom you were hoping for. There's also the Deathbell Lily Fields. Whenever someone in the material world dies of one of Nurgle's sicknesses, one of the flowers here softly chimes. On the one hand, given Nurgle's love of gardening, I imagine that it could be a soft and pleasant sound, but on the other hand, I find it a lot funnier if it makes the Nirnroot hum. Picture walking through Nurgle's garden, enjoying the sights, and every now and again you just hear meow. Nurgle's garden is, tentatively, one of the least outright unpleasant places to get stuck in within the warp. Like a lot of diseases, it builds up slowly. While obviously unpleasant, cases such as the Eldar projecting into it prove it isn't immediately jumping you with super raids. Not always, anyways. You may be able to wander through for a bit, trotting through mud and filth. Toxins and bacteria build up slowly. You slowly become more sick. By the time the sickness has taken hold, it's too late. There's no treatment for the worst of Nurgle's rot, only taking your place as either one of his followers, becoming a demon of his, or becoming a fixture in Nurgle's garden. Oh, and it's also at least a moderate bit ruined now. Biggie lit it on fire. Whoops. Let's move on now, and reach for the low-hanging fruit. Welcome to the best and worst place to end up. Too much of a good thing and all that. Well, this place is that incarnate. The smallest realm at any given moment, since Slaanesh tends to be the weakest chaos god, it is still nonetheless a nearly infinite realm of debauchery and hedonism. In a rather interesting twist, we can see through her realm what happens when two Chaos Gods' realities interact. The Vale of Creatures is where Slaanesh and Nurgle's domains border, and there's a lovely assortment of horrific creatures to be found. Mutated animals, trees, everything. It's silent, so silent that to be heard you need to shout, and even then the place turns it into a whisper. Most creatures born here die before ever leaving, either to each other or lost in disease-ridden, literally animalistic pleasure, since remember, this is Slaaneshi in part. Mortals entering become depraved and bestial in nature, and the strongest monsters that leave can wreak untold havoc on the world. Not Slaanesh only, but still. Figured I'd talk about it. As for the Slaanesh-only land, the most and more or less only thing worth knowing is the Rings of Temptation that make it up. There's 6 of them in total, each corresponding to a different sin. Simple stuff, but it's hardly like sins need to be complex to be fallen into. No one starts out in life in defeat, after all. If you give in to your desires for even a moment, you're trapped in Slaanesh's realm until you die. For this reason, much like Tzeentch's realm, there's not too much in the way of security, and in fact, Slaanesh wants you here. Most people don't have the willpower to say no to unlimited desire, after all, in spite of what you'll find plenty of people saying online about anything related to Slaanesh. The Imperium's strongest soldier on Twitter is a beacon of the Emperor's might until the moment they're in front of a demonette. The first circle of sin is avarice, and to be frank, this is the least likely one I feel you'd get stuck in. Admittedly, this does come to the fact that I am a real person looking into Warhammer, and people on the inside probably aren't aware of the fact that if you give in and grab a few coins while you're here, you're stuck forever. I know I can't take anything out of here, but most people in the universe don't. And in all fairness to those people, there's nothing but riches here. Coins, paper currency, gems of flawless quality, and more abound. abound. If you have even the slightest bit of greed in your heart, or even I imagine if you're just desperate for money for one good reason or another, Slaanesh already has you. The next layer is where I'm gonna be honest, I start running into trouble, because it's gluttony. No, I'm by no means a glutton. I've been watching my weight a bit, I've even lost a few pounds, but I like food. When I go somewhere new, one of my favorite things to do is just try new cuisine. Food's delicious, even if you aren't stuffing your face with it. And if I ended up in a realm full of every single delicacy imaginable, and since it's Slaanesh's realm, you can absolutely eat till you burst and not feel a thing, I think I'd be in trouble. Again, simple, but sin so often is. The third circle is that of general desire, and oftentimes that is exactly what you think it is. Bone your way into damnation, who cares? It could be desire in any way, of course. Slaanesh is more than capable of catering at least your perceptions of the realm to what you want. It could even be drawing from the previous layers. You make it through those, but the temptation was getting to you as you traveled. Your purest desire may have been to be filthy rich the whole time, but you barely managed to push through it at first. Well, guess what? The third circle's throwing it all back in your face for round 2, and it'll be a lot harder to make it through your innermost desires a second time. But of course, yes, also funny haha sex. For all that people get dismissive when you bring it up with Slaanesh, I imagine that there aren't many people who can make it past being presented with a perfect lover for everything you want. The one that got away is now back in front of you, and they're trapping you in Slaanesh's realm forever because of your own desire. Circle 4 is adoration, let's call it. This plays on not only being praised as a hero and the best guy ever, but gives you the ability to reign over an army of imaginary sycophants. Not terribly interesting to me, this one, but I can imagine there's no small amount of others who would get caught in being praised by an army of simps that are really demons in disguise. The second to last circle is vanity. It's very simple. You're shown an image of the ultimate, perfect version of yourself. If you feel even an ounce, the slightest smidgen of admiration for this ideal image of you, that's it, you're here forever now. And the final circle is even simpler than the rest. It's just resting. It's the perfect, most tranquil environment ever, and all it calls you to do is lay your head down for just a moment. Obviously, if you do, your journey ends there as you nap yourself to death, but do think about why this is the final layer. By this point, you've made it through 5 layers by nothing but sheer determination, and probably at least a few demons trying to kill you. Every want you could think of has been thrust in front of your face repeatedly, anything you can imagine dangled in front of you. Since this is all the warp, mind you, this journey could be taking place over the course of centuries. Centuries of having to be disciplined, of having to keep your willpower intact in front of all you could ever possibly want. And at the end of it all, before the center of Slaanesh's realm, you're offered just a bit of respite. No wonder people falter here. At the center is Slaanesh's palace itself, where she who thirsts resides. There are, sure enough, plenty of demons of all kinds here, but they aren't guardians. They're attendants and handmaidens, servants and thralls. Because upon arrival to the Palace of Slaanesh, Slaanesh herself greets you, and in that moment, your willpower breaks and you become a servant of hers. Countless perfect marble statues line the walls, all that remains of those who've managed to make it this far before. Elf and Eldar, Space Marine, other demons, it doesn't matter. All who enter here are now property of Slaanesh. By and large, this is what you could call the generic parts of the warp. It's by and large full of generic standard nightmares instead of themed ones. In some ways, it's less dangerous because in theory, there's patches of it that are mostly empty. Be it because a patch of the warp or realm of chaos is calmer there, or because there's just not a big 4 chaos god hanging around, the hostility is limited to just what chaos normally causes, as opposed to that and getting jumped by bloodthirsters. However, it's also less orderly for it. There's no semi-reliable themes to expect, just the whims of the warp. And armies of the 4 can still be found here as well, so you aren't totally free of them. Plus, in some places, there's demon princes and normal demons of sufficient power and strength to hold their own domains. They may be new or older than even the 4 themselves, but either way, any being capable of carving out a corner for themselves in the warp in spite of the big 4 being around is one to be feared. Somewhere in the Formless Wastes also lies the Forge of Souls, theoretically existing in fantasy as well thanks to the Total Warhammer 3 campaign no one plays anymore in favor of Immortal Empires. It's most prominent in 40k thanks to Vashtor being the guy in charge of it. The Forge of Souls is the Lockheed Martin of chaos, creating vast amounts of arms and armor and, most importantly, soul grinders. Any demon can become a soul grinder in exchange for a massive power boost, but all souls they kill go towards paying off the debt they accrue becoming one, and they have to defend it if any of the other chaos gods attack it, including potentially the god they're a demon of. Of course, the soul count they need is damn near impossible to get, and until they manage to achieve the count, they're stuck as a soul grinder. They can easily be reforged if they're destroyed, but such a process means the soul grinder in question is getting a whole lot more souls added to the tally they need already. Still, Vashtor doesn't punish them for being late on fulfilling the contract, since it's a contract that doesn't have an end date. Whenever you manage to get all the souls you need, you're free and can go be your own demon again with a power boost. Plenty of demons try and break their sides of the bargain, however, which is where Vashtor presumably then throws them into the Soul Forge's furnace as fuel. It's a rough life in the Soul of Forge, and a rough life in the Formless Wastes in general, but for an enterprising demon trying to go solo, or perhaps even a psyker trying to make their Warhammer version of a demi-plane, it's about the only option they have. Surprise, 40k only fans, you're getting jumped by more fantasy without you asking for it for the second time in a video. Welcome to the Realm of Ruin. Population, one giant asshole rat and a whole lot of smaller asshole rats. For this bit, we're going on a mental exercise. Picture the average Skaven city. Bottom 5 places in Warhammer easy, they suck. You know what? Skaven Blight specifically, let's go whole hog on this. The entire festering shit pile full of Skaven and vermin and disease and ruined buildings and ruined ruins and warpstone and just awful all around. Now imagine if that was an entire reality full of Skaven demons. We have finally done it, ladies and gentlemen. We have found the bottom of the barrel. A Warhammer city nearly as awful as real-life Chicago. Within the Realm of Ruin lies the Vermin Lords, the greater demons of the Horned Rat. There are supposedly as many Vermin Lords as there are actual Skaven in the mortal world, which means that, yeah, everyone else is screwed. They're just as cowardly against other greater demons as normal Skaven are of everyone else, but wait till they get desperate enough and I'm sure they'll make some major moves. Warpstone blankets the air as the Vermin Lords, dead Skaven souls, and countless normal rats skitter about, chittering so loud you can't hear anything but that. It also, much like the rest of the Realm of Chaos, plays fast and loose with the laws of physics and whatnot, because of course it does. Within it lies the Vermin Hall, the personal building? Chambers? The personal shit heap of the Horned Rat himself. Within this structure lies not only him, but the Shadow Council of 13, consisting of the greatest of Vermin Lords and of course the Horned Rat himself. His throne here, unlike in the Mortal Council of 13, is not symbolic but actually sat upon by the Big Rat, and here they dictate what the Skaven will be doing in their day-to-day life on top of whatever nonsense they'll be doing anyways. The Realm of Ruin also, somehow, is part of the Mortal Realms, because the Skaven crashed Skaven Blight, which was partially in the Realm of Chaos, into all the Mortal Realms but Azir, which means that it is everywhere. And also, because Chaos is sort of a little kind of connected between the settings, that means that there's only ever one gnawhole away from Skaven Blight's worst showing up underneath Terra itself. And while Lord knows there's plenty more warp lore out there, that's about it for the basics. It sucks, logic and reason go here to die, and the nightmare demons sometimes are the least of your worries. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the non-existent laws of physics to my warp, a nice bonus to really make things a lot more interesting than they otherwise would be. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching and take care out there. Alright, so there's 3 choices ahead of you right now. You have to survive a day fighting in Khorne's realm, a day in the Realm of Ruin trying to stay hidden from the Skaven, or a day in Slaanesh's realm not giving in to temptation. Honestly, I'm gonna go with Slaanesh, not because I think I'm the guy who will magically resist all the temptation, but because I'm hoping if I can walk around circles long enough in the Avarice realm specifically, I can avoid the rest of them. If I accidentally end up in any of the others, I am damned without a doubt, but if it's just the money pile, I think I can hold myself back long enough enough to be free. I'm certainly not surviving combat with Khornate demons, and I'm absolutely not making it through the Realm of Ruin without getting jumped by 20 vermin lords.